everyone. Thank you for joining me again for another interview on the Plant-Based Cyclist channel. With me is a very special guest whom I met via social media, Facebook, I believe, and with very, very similar interests as me. The age is a little bit different, as at 63 years old, he is riding his bike faster than ever, and he's all powered by plants. Working as a biology teacher in Great Britain, my guest is Mick Walker, the vegan cyclist. You can check out his webpage, which I will post in the description below, where he has more information about himself. He has a blog, more information about the plant-based lifestyle, and it also provides a way to get a hold of him. Hello, Mick. Thank you for joining us.
Hello.
What time is it right now there? 10? 10 p.m.?
9.
9? Okay. All right. So when did you first get into cycling?
Oh, a long time ago, in my 20s. I actually started cycling after I had a car accident in which a knee was damaged, and I thought that cycling was quite a good way of recovering from that damage, and indeed it proved to be so, and I've cycled ever since.
Now, do you have you ever raced competitively, or has it been more touring? What's been the scope of your cycling?
In my 30s, late 20s and 30s, I did some time trial racing. More touring since then, but then more recently, I've been taking part in a number of sportives. Do you have sportives in the States? Do you call them sportives?
Yeah, like a Grand Fondo almost.
Yes,
Yes.
they're organised events. Usually, the ones I ride are usually 100 miles or more, electronically timed. And because I'm in the north of England, they're usually quite hilly, actually.
Okay. Now, your combination of being a cyclist and being plant-based, the first reaction I got was and so correct me if I'm wrong, but you just became plant-based, was it in 2014?
Yes,
Okay.
fully plant-based.
Fully plant-based. So maybe
Yeah.
you can kind of explain that, and I guess my initial reaction to that is it seems like a pretty radical health change at such, I guess at the age of 62. Kind of take us through what you learned and why did you make this change in your life?
Okay, my wife and I, 35 years ago, decided to cut meat out of our diets.
Okay.
I think the main reason for that at the time was a realization that trying to feed billions of people on the planet, raising animals, isn't a very efficient way of doing it. So we stopped eating meat. With what I know now, I'm probably a little bit embarrassed to say that we carried on with fish for the time being. We also carried on with dairy and eggs. We had 2 young sons, and I suppose we thought that that was quite a good way of making sure they were getting enough protein. So I guess we were what you today would call pescatarian for quite a long time. Then, probably about 8 years ago now, I became concerned about the overfishing situation. So I decided then to cut fish out as well. And then a little bit after that, I had been reading about the ethics of the dairy industry. And at that point, I stopped using milk in tea and coffee and on cereal, although I did carry on eating cheese at that time. And I ate cakes and biscuits, cookies as you call them, which would have had probably milk and butter and so on in them. And then at the beginning of 2014, my son and I decided we were going to try and ride what is claimed to be the toughest sportive in the UK, which is called the Fred Whitman Challenge. I don't know whether you've heard of it.
No.
It takes place in the English Lake District. It's 112 miles and it's extremely hilly. There are 4,000 meters of climbing in the day. We got places in it in the January, and at that point I upped my daily cycling to 50 miles a day, which was a commute, to try and get in shape for this particular ride. And I felt I could do with losing a little. I've never been particularly overweight, but I was a little bit heavier then than I am now, and I felt I could shed a few more pounds. So I thought, right, I'm going to cut cheese out of my diet now, which I did, and almost at the same time, my other son recommended that I should read Scott Jurek's book, Eat and Run. You're familiar with that book, presumably?
I'm familiar with that book. I'm familiar with the person, but I definitely want to hear maybe in the next question more about how he influenced. But keep going with this.
Well, I mean, that is a really inspirational book, and it almost immediately made me to decide to go fully 100% plant-based. I was also coincidentally talking to somebody shortly after that who recommended I read the China Study, which I think nearly all plant-based people about plant-based nutrition are familiar with the China Study, and that really sealed it for me. So at that point, I gave up all animal products, and I haven't touched any since.
Good for you. Now, so this kind of segues into another question here. We'll get to the Scott Jurek and your inspirations here in a minute. So I just want to, I guess I made a little observation that your initial reasons for going plant-based were very much environmental and health related.
Yes.
Okay. And then how, if you think of the reasons for going plant-based as a big pie chart, what percentage of that would you say, if any, is which percentage of that is ethical, health reasons, and environmental for you personally?
Last year, when I chose to go 100% plant-based, it was almost totally health reasons.
Okay.
However, once I then started to link up with more plant-based athletes or plant-based people on social media, then the whole ethic and environmental issues start to become much more obvious as well. And I fully agree and support all the ethical and environmental issues as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we are very similar in that aspect where, the reason why I went plant-based is the movie Forks Over Knives. Have you seen Forks Over Knives? Yeah.
Yeah.
Great movie. So originally it was health-based, and I didn't have a chronic disease. Chronic diseases don't really run in my family, but I thought if I want to live to be 100, and I say that kind of jokingly but kind of serious, then it's best for my health. And then watching more movies, gathering more information, the environmental reasons just are stacked upon the meat and dairy industry. And as far as ethics goes, I always say that I am evolving, and I would much rather pet a cow or have a pig as a pet than eat one, I guess. That's especially if it's not needed for health.
Sure.
So tell us about your immediate influences and Scott Jurek and his book and how that influenced you.
Well, of course, Scott Jurek claims that he couldn't really have achieved what he has had it not been for his 100% plant-based diet. I mean, the fact that he's just broken the record for the Appalachian Trail is incredible. The fact that he ran almost the equivalent of 2 marathons every day for, I think, 46 days is just unbelievable, really.
Yeah.
And as I say, I found his book totally inspirational. And, of course, then I started to learn about people like Rich Roll and Brendan Fraser and people like that. These are all in the States, of course. There's very little of this sort of activity over here.
Yeah.
And then, having read the China Study, I went on to read T. Colin Campbell's book Whole, and more recently his son Tom Campbell's book The Campbell Plan, and it just all makes so much sense. And as you say, I've watched Forks Over Knives, I've read their book, and that brings in other supporters of the plant-based diet, the Esselstyns, Caldwell and his son Rip, and just so many. You look at those. You talk about reaching 100. You look at T. Colin Campbell and Caldwell Esselstyn, who are both around about 80 now. You will never see two fitter-looking 80-year-olds.
No, I agree.
And it just it just makes total sense.
Yeah, yeah. Do you hope to be the rich roll of Great Britain? Maybe is that why you're doing this interview?
I quite like to be seen as one of the oldest people to complete certain of these sporty sort of
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
I did the Fred Whitten. I mean, actually, I'm just in the middle of writing a blog about some of these rides, so you could read about them on my website. I did it in under 9 hours this year, which is pretty decent, really.
Nice, nice.
Um, so I was pleased with that.
Now you mentioned that you did see some weight loss. Can you tell us about any other health changes that you might have seen? Let's say, take us from the beginning, maybe when you dropped meat, and maybe later on in life when you dropped when you cut fish or cut dairy. Anything specifically?
The biggest change was when I went 100% plant-based, and I immediately began to notice how much stronger I was getting on my back. It was noticeable.
Hmm.
I mean, as a cyclist, that you can gauge your fitness and strength by how you cope with hills, really. If the road starts to rise a little bit, you've got the option of either putting a bit more power into your legs or dropping a gear.
Mm-hmm.
And I found I gradually was much better able to put that extra bit of power into my legs than I had probably ever been able to do before. And it was noticeable.
Mm.
I mean, I go out cycling now with a few other cyclists who are all younger than me. And I mean, some of them can't believe how I leave them behind on hills and stuff.
That's good. Now, have you before? Did you ever get any blood lipid profiles and get your blood fats looked at, your cholesterol?
No, I haven't actually.
No.
Well, no, I haven't. No.
Okay.
No.
No, I was just curious.
Oh, well, there is one issue
Yeah.
that I have had a history of high blood pressure, which has been in my family. My mother, my uncle, and my grandmother all had high blood pressure, and I've always had it.
Mm-hmm.
And about 10 years ago, the doctor put me on some medication for it, and only a low level.
Mm-hmm.
My blood pressure is pretty well normal now. I don't take any medication.
Good, good. That's great. I mean, I think the more I was just talking with. I'm reading a book now by Dustin Rudolph. He is known as the plant-based pharmacist.
Oh yeah, I
here
saw that.
here in the States, and it's a really interesting perspective to get a pharmacist look on how many side effects these pills have. So I think the more we can get off these pills, the better for long-term health for sure. Um, I found it, as a fellow instructor and a teacher, I teach a nutrition class here in the States, and we do the students do course evaluations. So they kind of, it's totally anonymous. They say, I like this class because, or I didn't like this class because, and they tend hopefully to give constructive criticism on how we can make it better. One thing I was accused of doing last year, which was my first year of teaching this nutrition class, was being a little bit too biased towards, first of all, cycling, which I'm just using cycling as examples, but too biased towards a plant-based lifestyle, encouraging too many plants, saying that meat does this, dairy products do that, and I'm making a change. So this question kind of to you is, as a biology teacher, has your understanding of human physiology and biology and knowing what you know about diet and nutrition and meat and dairy, has that influenced the way you teach certain curricula?
No.
No.
I mean, the biology curriculum, requires us to teach that humans are basically omnivores.
Sure.
So, I mean, that's kind of factual
Sure.
side of it. And actually, I've always been very careful not to try and impose my views or my opinions on any of my students, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do always point out, even more so now, that humans don't have to eat meat.
Good.
And I usually use myself as an example of that. And they're often quite horrified when I'm actually a vegan. In fact, the school, in recent years, I've been doing short-term contracts, usually covering maternity leave.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in a school at the moment. Well, we go back to school tomorrow, actually. And last term, I was trying to raise a bit of sponsor. When I do this Fred Whitten ride, I raise money for the local air ambulance. And I was trying to raise some sponsorship. So I actually gave an assembly about my cycling.
Neat.
I mean, my route to this particular school is 18 miles each way, and it's very hilly, so
Wow.
it's quite a good ride, actually. And I record it on Strava.
Hmm.
So I showed them all this in the assembly, and I showed them the ride I was going to be doing in the Lake District. And at the very end, I said, "Oh, and by the way, I do all of this on a vegan diet," and there was almost a gasp of shock.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny how people think you're a perfectly normal human being, but then when you say I'm doing all this and not eating any animal products, they look at you like you're an alien, like you have three heads.
Yeah.
But I think we're moving in the right direction as a whole, and I think it's like I said, people like you and me who kind of dispel some rumors and try to educate people. So I'll definitely, as both of my parents were teachers, one actually seventh grade biology and seventh grade English, and I'm going to take a page out of their book and your book as well and try to be a little bit more objective and give them the whole picture. So
I do know somebody actually who is a vegan, has been in a school recently, and they did get a complaint from a parent that one of the pupils went home and refused to eat meat anymore.
hey, it's not a bad thing, but I guess you're not gonna please everyone. So in your opinion, I don't know. I'm assuming the media is pretty much the same over there as it is over here. Why do we need so much protein, Mick?
Well, I think we're beginning to realise we probably don't. I mean, the Campbells reckon 10% of our calories should come from protein, and that seems to be fine. I mean, I think it's a complete misconception that's been held for a very long time that that our diet should be based around protein and around animal protein in particular. Clearly, it doesn't need to be.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it shouldn't be.
Right. So I mean, based on your knowledge of biology and physiology, and this is what I tell people all the time, is the primary macronutrient that we should be getting most of our energy from for day-to-day activities is carbohydrates.
Sure.
I think we can both agree that, and protein is absolutely necessary. We just don't need the amounts that we think we do, and it just kind of boggles my mind at why. I guess I don't know why it's emphasized so much. Maybe because it's in the animal products and the meats, and that's how they sell more of their product.
But I mean, the Campbells in the China study have demonstrated that actually it's large amounts of protein and large amounts of animal protein which fuel the growth of cancer.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's very telling. That's a huge finding, and oftentimes people are so either surprised, or people who I say that to, they kind of brush it off like, it's almost like a conspiracy theory. But
Oh yeah.
I think the more people we reach, the more that will kind of, and it makes, like you said before, with just eating no animal products, it makes a lot of sense. It really does. If you know the way that cells grow and replicate, that hey, they need protein to grow and replicate, and if you're eating too much of it, you're not only gonna grow your waistline, but you're also gonna grow the cancer cells.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, not too long ago, somebody tweeted, make someone smile today. And I actually replied and said, somebody smiles every day when I tell them I'm vegan.
So
It's true, isn't it?
no, it is true. It is true. I definitely, I get a reaction out of some people when that happens. But why do you think there's so much of a push for low carb, high fat, or low carb, high protein diets?
Well, I recently read something else by T. Colin Campbell. I keep mentioning the Campbells, but they're the ones that I've probably read most of their material. He's written a short book called The Low Carb Fraud. Have you come across it?
I have. It's actually on my Amazon wish list right now. For once I get done with this book by Dr. Rudolph, I will be reading that for sure. Yeah.
I mean, the point about the low carb, high fat diet. I mean, most people are tempted by certain diets because they are assured it will help them lose weight.
Mm-hmm.
And T. Colin Campbell agrees that the low-carb, high-fat diet initially does help to promote weight loss if you're overweight. Now, I mean, the Atkins diet, of course, is one of the most famous of these diets. And what Atkins was claiming was that if you starve your body of carbohydrate, then your body will tend to switch over to respiring fats instead. I mean, you just said carbohydrates are our main source of energy. So our body's default situation is that we will use carbohydrates as our source of energy if carbohydrates are available, and we won't touch our fats. So if we manage to switch over to respiring fats instead, then we'll start to lose weight, and it happens. But the big point that T. Colin Campbell makes is that it's not healthy and it's not sustainable in the long term. And it doesn't seem to me that it could be sustainable either.
And just can you give us what you've read about with T. Colin Campbell is why isn't it sustainable in the long term? Why would it not last?
Well, all the reasons why the whole food plant-based diet is sustainable. There's too much protein and too much fat in the low-carb, high-protein diet.
And so I think another thing that I've read too is the body has an evolutionary drive to seek out sugars and carbohydrates. So another thing I've read these people with these high protein diets is they're eating so few carbs that it's sustainable for a couple weeks or maybe a month, but after that you're going to be so ravenous and your brain is just going to take over and say we need to go out and we need to seek out carbohydrates. That's another reason why it's not sustainable. Sure. Now, one of your blogs, I enjoyed reading the one on the glycemic index. And when I was learning about, I became plant-based in 2011, but before that I was really into nutrition, and I bought a book on the glycemic index, and I thought that, this is sort of the holy grail of what people need to know about nutrition. Can you kind of explain what the glycemic index is, and should we be worried or should we be concerned about it?
Well, the glycemic index was brought in the early 1980s as a way of indicating how quickly certain foods would cause blood sugar to rise. And the concern at that time, and still is to some extent, is that when our blood sugar rises very rapidly, that stimulates a high release of insulin. And the insulin causes that blood sugar to be taken up by the cells very quickly, quite a bit of it to be converted into fat. And we start to feel hungry again, and then we need another intake of sugar, and so it becomes a vicious circle. And so the whole idea behind the glycemic index was that diets for people who had a tendency towards diabetes or a tendency towards obesity should probably be trying to avoid foods which have too high a glycemic index. Now, I did read somewhere, I can't remember where, that probably if you're very active, the glycemic index is almost irrelevant. Mm-hmm. And I think that makes some sense as well. I mean, I eat virtually no added sugar today. Mm-hmm. I mean, occasionally I might add a bit of maple syrup to something. I might add maple syrup or agave syrup to some of the bars that I make when I'm going cycling and things like that. But I have no added sugar whatsoever. So I suppose on the whole, I'm tending to eat foods with a pretty low glycemic index anyway.
So I guess from my knowledge of the glycemic index, though, there are some foods that I consider healthy that are on the high end of the high glycemic index. For example, like potatoes, white potatoes. You have some varieties of rice, and even like I know carrots are up there in the 80s or 90s. So do you feel take some of these foods and eat them in moderation, or would you prescribe to the notion of if it's still a whole plant food, you can eat it?
I think you can. And there's something called the glycemic load as right. well, which is it's a little bit more complicated but you can have a high glycemic index food which actually has a relatively low glycemic load. In other words, the quantities that you would tend to eat will not cause these sudden spikes in blood sugars. So I think if you're eating a whole food, particularly starch-based foods like your rice and your
Hmm.
potatoes, I think that's fine.
Yeah, and I think, but the majority, one message that we can take away from the glycemic index is that the majority of foods up there in the 70s and 80s and 90s, most of them are highly refined, highly
Yeah.
processed. All the fibers been stripped so that it just shoots into your bloodstream. And yeah, unlike potatoes and rice have the natural fibers that slow digestion a little bit. So yeah, so I think
Like, so again, the whole food plant-based diet would say you should only eat brown rice now anyway.
true. You're right, and that actually is a change. And I will admit, my girlfriend and I are trying to get through a 20-pound bag of white rice that we bought about a month ago, and then we're gonna make the switch to buying large quantities of brown rice because yeah, it enters your bloodstream slower and it has more of the vitamins and minerals that your body needs. Good point. So I'm always looking to become healthier. Um, I'm going to switch gears a little bit to tell me about what you've studied on animal agriculture and how it does affect the planet. Because I don't know if there's as much debate over in Great Britain as there is in here. We have the presidential debates coming up, and they're talking a lot about climate change and global climate change and how not only are fossil fuels to blame, but also animal agriculture. And does it really have a significant or play a significant role on global climate change, do you think?
Massively. I mean, in the Forks Over Knives book, there's certainly a section that talks about agriculture having a greater effect on climate change than all the vehicles in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one way of thinking about it is if we use an area of land and we grow plants, then those plants remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. There's a net reduction in CO2. Okay, this is looking at it in a simplistic way, but it's basically correct. We then harvest those plants and we consume them. We then release some of that carbon back into the atmosphere when we respire. Then those plants take it back in again. It's actually quite a sustainable way of producing food and maintaining levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
If animals, I mean, some of these concentrated animal feed operations in the States and Argentina and places where they've got colossal numbers of cattle, huge numbers of sheep in parts of Australia, tens upon tens of thousands of hens in broiler houses and so on. They've hardly got any plants in sight, some of those places.
Right.
And they're being fed high protein concentrate food, and they're churning out carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, masses of waste, which when it decays and decomposes produces ammonia. They have a huge effect on climate change. The other figure I remember from Forks Over Knives was something like if everyone in the States gave up one chicken meal a week, it would be equivalent to removing 500,000 vehicles from the road.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty incredible.
So there's no doubt.
Yeah. Another one, I don't know if so. California right now is in one of the worst droughts that we've ever seen. And have you seen the movie Cowspiracy?
No, it's one that's on my list to watch.
It's a good
Actually.
one. It's really good. I like Forks Over Knives. It talks about more. It just looks at the health consequences of eating animal products. And Cowspiracy does a great job at finding its niche in just explaining really well how animal agriculture impacts the environment. And but basically, so California is going through this drought, and he centers the movie around kind of California, and he confronts congressmen and elected officials and says, instead of trying to save a couple gallons here and there with not watering your lawn and not taking long showers, we can eliminate, we can save something like, I think it's 4 or 5 thousand, maybe it's 2 or 3 thousand gallons of water per burger if we just reduce the amount of meat, and it doesn't even seem like an option for them. Have you seen anything about that?
Yeah, well, there are lots of figures um, around comparing the amount of water required to produce different plant crops and the amount of water required to produce different animal products.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have the figures immediately to hand, but the differences are phenomenal,
Right.
absolutely phenomenal.
Right. And that actually is a great segue into my next question is, so let's say in a perfect world, we were able to phase out all of the CAFOs, as you described, the concentrated animal feeding operations, and all these hen houses and these farms that have, tens of thousands of hogs and everything, and pigs and chickens. Um, so that's a huge food source for us. Will there be enough food for everyone and to feed the whole world after that if all those animals are gone?
I think potentially there could be. I mean, I do remember at one time reading that if everybody in the world was to eat as much meat as I think it was the average American, we would probably need 7 planets
Mm-hmm.
to be able to produce that much meat.
Yeah.
And it's just not sustainable at the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, there's over 7 billion people. That amount has doubled since early 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
So if it doubles again in the next 30 years or so, I mean, the only way. I mean, people like Bill Gates are now beginning to say that that's the only way forward, isn't it?
Yeah.
Plant-based diet
Yeah.
for everyone.
Yeah. I completely 100% agree with that. So the next section I kind of want to do is we're doing great on time here. I was hoping to maybe keep this within an hour, if that's okay with you. We have what I like to call a kind of a buzzword round, where I'm just going to kind of give you current words that are within the media now that people are talking about, and kind of get your take on if you've done any research on them or if you have an opinion of them. Let's start off first with, as a biology teacher, this is an interesting one. How about GMOs?
Again, Tom Campbell, in his book The Campbell Plan, discusses the issue of GMOs. He doesn't have, in terms of the health issues, a strong opinion either way, although I think he's a little bit concerned that that they may end up showing that they do have some health issues. His argument there, and I would agree with this, is that most plant crops that have been genetically modified have been done so mostly for 2 reasons. One is it's big business for companies like, well, Monsanto is the one that's always quoted, and it makes food production a little bit easier, a little bit more efficient for some of the farmers. I'm not sure that the possible consequences for diet have really been thoroughly thought through, and there's very little research being done on the possible health effects. Indeed, I think there's a suggestion that that's almost being prevented because farmers who buy GMO seeds and crops have to sign all sorts of disclaimers. I doubt nutritionally that they are very different. And, I'm sure we've all been eating quite a lot of GMO product for many years anyway. Because the other thing is, they don't need to be stated on most food labels. Although I did read are there a few states now in America that are requiring them to be added to labels?
I'm not sure about that. I know that
I
think there might be. I know that there was a big push in California. There's like Prop 38. I think might have been something on the ballot that citizens of California would like food to be labeled with GMOs. But I think there's a huge push from the other side, from the food industries, not to label because they're sort of thinking if we put this on our products, sales are going to go down, whether GMOs are good or bad, because people just hear the GMOs and it's a buzzword, and people think that they're bad, bad, bad. So I don't. There's nothing like that on a national scale, but maybe locally in states there is. So good. That's interesting. How about raw foods?
Well, of course, you and I tried a raw diet
Were you
recently.
did you try that as well?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So what do you think?
Um, I don't entirely understand some of the claims of the raw food people, I would have to say. But I can imagine there may be some merit in that diet. So I wouldn't completely dismiss
Yeah.
it. Because I eat a lot of fruit and a lot of salad, quite a high percentage of my diet is raw anyway. And it did occur to me when I was trying to eat a raw diet recently that, of course, we are the only animals who do cook food. No other animal does. So whether we really should be cooking our food or not um, is an interesting question.
Yeah.
When I was trying the raw diet, I mean, I really did miss the rice and the pasta and the potatoes,
Mhm.
even after 2 or 3
Yeah.
days. Um, and, I've just eaten quite a big plate of potatoes this evening. I mean, I base every evening meal around potatoes or rice. And I think I would find it quite difficult not to have that as a main part of my diet.
Yeah.
I also found it difficult to fill myself on a raw food diet. I was hungry
Yeah.
a lot of the time.
And I think have you ever heard of John McDougall?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and starch solution. I think he claims that starches fill you up and they give you satiety or satiation. And as an athlete as well, at the time I wasn't riding 100 miles a day on my bike, but a friend of mine who I interviewed, Derek Damas, was the first interview. He was doing the raw vegan challenge for a week, and he went out for a run. I think it was on the last day, on the Sunday, for like a 9 or 10 mile run. He said he bonked so hard because throughout the week he was always in a deficit. He couldn't get enough calories in. So another thing is starches are great to get in a lot of calories in a relatively small portion. When if you're talking relative to uh, raw fruits and raw salads, so good. Um,
I'm not aware of any of the Scott Jureks, Rich Rolls of this world being raw. Are you?
there is a runner. I'm trying to think of his name now. I watched an interview with this guy, and he is a runner. He wanted to break 3 hours or 2 hours and 30 minutes on a marathon, and he's all raw. He's a fruitarian. He owns 4 refrigerators. I wish I could think of his name, but he's a guy who is an endurance athlete, ultra
Okay.
endurance athlete, who is raw fruitarian. But I think, but no, I think the number is very, very small. Rich Roll is not raw. Scott Jurek, you'd know more about him. I don't think he's raw
No,
either.
no, he's
So
not.
some people can do it, and I say good for them if it makes them feel better and if it makes them healthier. But I think like I said in the summary video, I think there's nothing wrong with eating cooked starches.
I agree.
How about wheat and gluten?
Have you read Wheat Belly?
I haven't. My girlfriend has, and it's on my list. And I saw that you had. I do remember now that you had a blog about that. Go ahead and
I
go
did.
ahead and touch upon that.
Right. Wheat. I don't think I have a problem with gluten. And again, coming back to Tom Campbell, he is of the opinion that many people who are going on to the gluten-free diet at the moment don't really need to. Um, there is something called celiac disease, which you probably know about. Now, that is quite a serious condition which is triggered by wheat gluten, the protein in wheat. There are very few other issues that have been proved to be linked to wheat gluten. Now, William Davis, in his book Wheat Belly, does, however, make a very interesting point. He separates the issues with wheat into those caused by wheat gluten and those caused by the carbohydrate content. And the interesting point he makes about the carbohydrate content, which I think could have some merit, is that the most common form of modern wheat has been so intensively bred that the carbohydrate content has changed significantly over the last 60 years to a point where it now has a very high glycemic index. I know quite a few people who claim that when they eat wheat products, they can shortly afterwards start feeling very tired. Now, I hadn't ever experienced that, but when I was reading Wheat Belly, I actually stopped eating bread for a short time, and I had some chocolate cake that I'd made with plain flour, and I had quite a big piece of it left, and I ate it, and within about half an hour I was fighting to stay awake, and I was amazed that actually I had now experienced that. Mm-hmm. So gluten I'm not bothered about. The carbohydrate has made me tend, when I'm using flour, to use things like spelt flour and rye flour and some of the more ancient flours, on the basis that, as I say, William Davis claims that modern wheat does have a different carbohydrate content. I also actually have tried making seitan. Have you had seitan?
Yeah, that's made from the protein of wheat, is it not? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I quite like it occasionally, and I'm certainly not aware of it having any adverse effect on me whatsoever.
Can you touch on, cholesterol and saturated fats are vilified within this lifestyle as being the leading causes of, cardiovascular disease and heart attacks. Can you touch on those, and perhaps, is cholesterol and saturated fat, should it be vilified to the extent that it is?
Well, yes. There seems to be masses of evidence that it's cholesterol, particularly a group of chemicals called low-density lipoproteins, which are, they're sometimes described as a form of cholesterol. They're not really a form of cholesterol, but they're used to transport cholesterol around our bodies. The cholesterol, LDLs, and saturated fats are the prime cause of atherosclerosis, and there seems to be very little doubt about that. And you talk about, John McDougall and Caldwell Esselstyn. They have proved that people with advanced coronary heart disease and high levels of atherosclerosis can actually reverse it by removing saturated fats and cholesterol from the diet and going on a whole food plant diet. And I don't think there's any doubt about that whatsoever.
Do you think there's any role, though, to, we talk about cholesterol and saturated fat on the one hand, but then the diets of the standard American diet is also highly inflammatory. Do you think there's any role, do inflammatory foods in the form of highly processed foods play any role in coronary artery disease and atherosclerosis?
Well, they're implicated in having an influence on the endothelium, which is the lining of the arteries, and that actually most inflammatory response is based around the lining of the arteries and veins, and undoubtedly that further leads to damage to the endothelium, which is what leads to the buildup of the atherosclerosis, and then eventually possible blood clotting, particularly in the coronary arteries. So yes.
I'm going to skip down. I think you touched on your position on sugar, where you eat very, very little of it, maybe in maple syrup. I'm going to pretty much skip altogether. I'm going to skip dairy. I'm going to skip bacon. I'm going to skip eggs because, if anyone who's watching this knows who I am or has been watching this, I think they understand your position on that. How about coffee and caffeine in general?
I do drink coffee. However, I only drink it first thing in the morning. So most mornings I'll have 1 or 2 cups of coffee. Then that's it. I don't drink coffee again for the rest. Not for any other reason apart from the fact that I don't seem to like it at other times during the day. I don't have a big issue about caffeine. I don't drink any energy drinks that contain high levels of caffeine. I mean, Red Bull is a big one over here. Is it big in the States as well?
Of course, yep.
I mean, I've never even tasted anything like that, and I wouldn't. Caffeine gets a kind of a mixed press, doesn't it? I mean, you see articles to say that actually 2 or 3 cups of coffee a day are quite beneficial to your health. Other people say, well, actually it's not. I don't really know what the answer is to that. I'm happy drinking a couple of cups of coffee a day. I wouldn't drink any more than that. And I certainly wouldn't use products which have got added caffeine.
And I think too, let's say we were to say, for example, I wouldn't recommend drinking caffeine. The person who I'm talking to who may drink a lot of caffeine would say, well, hey, hold on a second, it's plant-based, right? It's plant-based. But then again, so is cocaine. So a lot of things are plant-based, and hemlock is plant-based, and that's a poison. So how about paleo diet? Is that as big over there as it is over here?
No, I don't. Well, I think it's catching on over here.
Yeah.
In T. Colin Campbell's book about the low carb fraud, he has a section about the paleo diet. It's only a very short. It's almost like an essay. Actually, it's not really a book. Actually, I've got mine on Kindle, so you were talking about getting that before. He says basically it's just another of the low carb, high fat, high protein diets. It's based, of course, on the idea that in the Paleolithic times, round about 2 to 2.5 million years ago, the Stone Age, that was the first time that humans developed tools and spears and were able to physically capture animals and then consume their meat. Why we should assume that then gave them a very healthy diet and lifestyle, I'm not quite sure, and I think some people do question that. What it means is that, as I understand it, the paleo diet is based on high levels of meat, fruit and vegetables, and eggs, but absolutely no grains, no starchy vegetables, and no dairy.
Sounds about right. That's my understanding. Yep. Yeah.
I think some of them don't eat much fruit either, which seems strange because there must have been plenty of fruit around at that time.
Well, yeah, and I think the more I talk to people who are on this, is they're thinking, as our ancient ancestors, the chimpanzee and the orangutans, as they migrated away from the warmer climates around the equator, they were in environments where maybe fruit wasn't as plentiful, but the root vegetables were, and the animals. So, I've seen a lot of people and heard a lot of people with good results doing paleo. But I guess you can chime in with your bottom line. But I guess my bottom line, if I speak to people about paleo, is just make sure you're feeling good, and I would get your blood lipid profile checked before you go paleo, because you could see an increase in blood cholesterol for starters.
Sure.
How about doctors prescribing dietary changes instead of prescriptions?
Well, that seems to be catching on quite big time in the States, doesn't it?
It is. I think we still have a ways to go, though.
I mean, I mentioned earlier that I don't know whether I did. I mean, we have a national health service in this country, and really, doctors and the health service do very little to promote people's health. What they do is they deal with people's diseases and illnesses. And they deal with them mostly in the form of medication, a little bit of dietary advice, a little bit of advice over exercise and alcohol, smoking and so on. But the majority of it is dealing with it. It's dealing with the symptoms and not dealing with the causes. And I think it's refreshing to see that one or two clinics at least are now starting to open in the States with the whole emphasis on educating people to eat a better diet, remove the causes of their illnesses, and promoting good health. And I think it's got to be the way forward.
Absolutely.
And saving a colossal amount of expenditure. I think I'm right in saying the third most common cause of death in the States is side effect of medication.
I believe you're right. It's either 3 or 4.
I can't find the figures for the UK. I've tried that they don't seem to be published anywhere, but I bet it's the same over here.
I would agree. At least the same percentage of the population. Yeah, and that's pretty disturbing. How doctors are, the third or fourth leading cause of death, and that goes, to show again, like we spoke about, how a ton of these modern, there's some medications that have been proven to work, like for basic things, like we'll say the side effects of ibuprofen are pretty nil. But what I want to differentiate between, these modern medicines made to treat chronic diseases, ton of side effects, and if people just understood that most of these chronic diseases are curable with just changing your diet and lifestyle, you would see. I thought you were going to say before, you would see the cost of healthcare go down, and the amount of money we would save would be astronomical.
It would.
One question I know I didn't get to before that we can absolutely address right now is I'm always curious to ask other people who are plant-based is what do you eat? Because I know sometimes I get into these ruts where I'm kind of eating the same thing over and over, and I could use a little refresher of like, oh, maybe I'll try this for breakfast. And I know a lot of people who are watching this could use some input on what do you eat over there in the UK? What are some of your staples?
Well, as far as breakfast is concerned, I make porridge either from oats or quinoa or sometimes bulgur wheat. If I've had bulgur wheat, do you have bulgur wheat in the States?
We do. I can't say that I've heard a lot of people who have eaten it, but we do, yeah.
If I eat bulgur wheat in an evening, I'll usually make more than I need and then warm it up with some non-dairy milk in the morning to produce a porridge. I also make a wonderful Scott Jurek pancake, which contains, I don't think it needs quite so many, but it contains 8 different sorts of wholemeal flours and flax. And I mix it with some non-dairy milk and make up a pancake. Now, whether I'm eating porridge or pancake, I'll pile loads of fruit on top. And at the moment, I'm eating a lot of mangoes, bananas, kiwi fruits. Do you call them kiwi fruits? They're all around here at the moment. But we've also got plenty of plums and peaches and nectarines and so on.
How about lunches and dinners?
Well, lunches, I do eat quite a lot of nut butters. So I eat peanut butter, I eat cashew nut butter and almond nut butter. Do you eat
I
those?
do. I'm a big fan, and it's one of my weaknesses. I actually, right here in my office, I have, just in case I'm hungry, I got bananas and I got some Jif peanut butter. So definitely huge fan of nut butters.
There's a company called Meridian. Do they sell their products in the States? I think they probably do.
Meridian, I've never seen it in a grocery store.
Okay. Well, they're based over here. They do kilogram tubs of cashew, almond, and peanut
There you go.
butters. So I quite often have some of that on. I usually use rice cakes rather than bread now. Um, there's also a product called Marmite. Do you know
I'm familiar
Marmite?
with Marmite. I'm not really sure what it is, but isn't it Australian of origin?
No, no, that's
Vegemite.
Vegemite.
Okay. What's Marmite?
Mar- Marmite's a slightly straight. They say about Marmite, you either love it or you hate it. There's no in between. It's a yeast extract, and you can use it as a spread. It's got a slightly straight. I like it, but the good thing about it is it has B12 vitamin added to it. So I have that on rice
Now,
crackers as well. And then I
do you
would.
supplement with B12 at all?
Well, no, no, I don't. I eat Marmite. This company Meridian I mentioned earlier, they also do a yeast extract where there's even more B12 added. I use quite a lot of nutritional yeast in my cooking now. Do you use that?
I do have some in my pantry, but I actually I don't use it very often. If I do, I guess I would throw it in. I throw it in my oatmeal sometimes. But what do you use it on?
Well, you can just put it on top of pasta like you would use Parmesan cheese actually. But I put it. I mean, again, one of Scott Jurek's book, as you probably know, has recipes at the end of every chapter, and one of them is for a kind of what he calls a vegan cheese spread, which is based on tofu, but it's the nutritional yeast which gives it a kind of cheesy taste. And the nutritional yeast that I use is also fortified with vitamin B12. So between those two, and when I buy non-dairy milks, I buy the ones that have had added vitamin B12 as well. So, I mean, again, I'm not 100% convinced that B12 is as big an issue as people make it out to be, because I'm sure there are a lot of people who theoretically could be short of vitamin B12. I certainly don't seem to have any issues.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. And I think the body, what people have to realize too, is the body can store a ton of vitamin
Yeah,
B12, years worth. So
yeah,
if
yeah.
you're talking to any long-term people who are plant-based or vegans, then maybe you could take a little supplement. But other than that, I don't think it's a big deal. And I, like you, I also look specifically for B12 fortified. Usually it's soy milks here in the States that I buy. How about, so you said also for dinners you eat a lot of starches, a lot of potatoes.
Well, again, I would usually base my evening meal around either potatoes or quinoa or bulgur wheat or rice. Um, what I quite like doing is cooking some onions with peppers, heating up the whatever it is, the bulgur wheat or the quinoa, adding beans to that. So either black beans or haricot beans or cannelloni beans, then mixing the whole lot together and putting some soy sauce on it.
Hmm. That sounds good. It's making me hungry. Um,
Um, that works quite well.
yeah. Well, that sounds good.
I make vegan pizzas occasionally,
Do
actually.
you? What's your what are
Yeah, and I
what are some of
make
your favorite toppings to put on that?
well. I like to make a vegan mozzarella out of cashew nuts and tapioca flour. Have you ever
I
made
have
that?
not. I gotta say I have very simple tastes, and I just stick to my staples.
Well, you can look at the rest of it. That works quite well. But then I like to put on tomato sauce, peppers, onions, and the vegan mozzarella.
Sounds good.
It's good.
It sounds good.
But I'd now make the base out of spelt flour usually.
Okay.
Doesn't work quite as well as white flour, but I prefer it.
Load on the veggies. Keep it mostly plant-based. Whole foods plant-based. I think that's the bottom line. Um, that's about what I had in terms of questions, and with all my interviews, I want to give the guest the last word. If you'd like to give the viewers any kind of message, feel free.
Um, you caught me on the hop there.
I can always edit that out.
No, well, I mean, I just wished that I'd adopted a whole food plant-based diet 40 years ago. I mean, I don't think I've suffered by not having done so, but I've certainly benefited during the last 2 years from it. And I mean, I'm constantly trying to persuade other friends and other people to adopt a similar diet, but it's hard work.
It is.
Having said that, my sister is actually a nutritionist and she's now vegan.
Wow.
Her son, my nephew, is now 100% plant-based and working for the Vegan Society as it happens. So I do have some relatives who are sympathetic to my cause.
And I think one thing that people can take away from you is that it's never too late. It's never too late to
Oh,
change
absolutely.
your diet.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a good place to end. Thank you so much, Mick Walker, for this interview.
Okay,
We'll
no
talk to you
problem.
soon. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.